So I skipped talking about Life is Strange 2 when it came out because it was in the middle of Scary October, but now that I'm back to talking about whatever, I'm happy to say that despite going into the experience with a big amount of skepticism, I think there's something great happening with the newest installment of Life is Strange, particularly in embracing and understanding their racial allegory within the story. Now, if you're familiar at all with the first Life is Strange, then you know they are not shy in their political allegory, as their first story had a strict feminist angle, and when you learn about the numerous ways in which misogyny and patriarchy weave themselves into day-to-day life of a young woman, then the main girl gets some superpowers and she is now allowed to take some control of her life and expose some of these wrongs. And Life is Strange 2 is no different. Of course, it's not at all related to the first story, save some callbacks, but it's trying to be its own thing. And it totally shows, because with the story, the creators are deliberately focusing on a racial angle through Mexican Americans, exploring elements of wealth inequality, police brutality, and community. Same basic premise of a young teen's life thrown into turmoil after superpower awakening. It's exactly what you expect of a coming-of-age superpower story. But I think to simplify the story to just that would be doing it injustice. You see, when the game begins, we're treated to an opening listomania montage of Sean, our older brother protagonist's daily ritual. We see his neighborhood, meet his cool friend Lila, and hear about his schoolhood crush. It's very simple but effective in how it's presented, with some clever shots panning over the town, luring you into a false sense of security. And your first task is to go home and get some supplies for the party you're going to later. So as a player, you think this is going to be a lot like the first game, a teenage story about a bunch of cool teens just messing around. Walking around Sean's house, you meet their loving father and his cute little brother Daniel, our younger protagonist. Their house is exploding with characterization about their family, like a coin jar because they're low on money, or a hanging picture of one of Sean's drawings, or a posters of Daniel's favorite superheroes. It's a relaxing and warming house to any player that's sure to endear you to all these characters. And I don't feel bad spoiling this because it happens within about 30 minutes, depending on how long you take, that in a scuffle with their racist neighbor, the police are called from the two boys, and their father, trying to vouch for them, is shot dead by the officer. So Sean and Daniel are forced to run away. And that's the intro. It leaves the player in almost shock because these types of events are supposed to come at the end. All that work you put into getting ready for the party, the little family touches, all the cute dialogue exchanges about whether or not Sean's gonna get to kiss the crush at the party, gone. All of it. Because now Sean and Daniel are on the run, and it shows how quickly their life changed in just a single moment. And so obviously, it's a story about a young Mexican teenager being threatened by a police officer and ending in the death of both the police officer and their father. Yeah, there's no real hiding the politics and agenda behind a story like that. It's pretty blatant. And I've said this before, but whether or not you agree with politics and media doesn't matter, because if a story wants to be political, then it better be ready to capture the depth of said issue. Also, politics are always going to be there, but we'll get into that a bit later. Anyway, starting with just that encounter, we're already seeing the depth of said issue of racism, with them tackling free and hate speech. Sean's neighbor Brett shouts racial slurs and other profanities at Sean to egg him on, knowing which buttons to push, evoking the fact that it's technically legal for him to do so because of free speech, despite how much it hurts Sean. This is what we all understand now as hate speech and its ability to invite violence. And while you may disagree with Sean resorting to violence, you can't deny that there is work to show that his reasons for doing so are anything if not sympathetic. Which, even despite that, Brett still pushes Sean first. But of course, none of that really matters because the police officer immediately assumes that Sean and Daniel are at fault, taking the incident out of context. Their father rushes outside, and trying to protect his kids, he's stuck between trying to talk to the police officer and assure his children in a hectic scene reflected by the camera work whipping back and forth, and he's killed. Because the whole Diaz family is not given the benefit of the doubt by authority. And when you read this incident in the newspaper later in the chapter, the reporting on them frames Sean as a violent teenager who attacked Brett, thus creating a false narrative surrounding the whole issue. It's also an important note that this new player clipping is only a few days away from the US 2016 election, a time when, as reports suggested, a rise in hate crimes arose. So already in this encounter, there are layers to this incident and how it transpired. And because this scene is pretty well thought out, none of the behavior in the scene is out of character. Sean is shown to be protective, Daniel is accident-prone, and Esteban is loving. So the political allegory is not taking away from these characters' individual story. And this is why I think the game works so well as a coming-of-age story with a political lens. Sean is forced to grow up a lot over the course of this episode, and every single coming-of-age story has the protagonist grappling with identity and self, and so the creators took that to heart by evoking real-life issues to give their game a certain depth, a touch of cruel reality to show Sean that racism is a part of the world and it will affect him, whether he wants it to or not. And it's even better utilized with the choose-your-own-adventure format, because a popular problem I have with racial allegories, it simplifies the issue to being the problem of an individual or a person's malice. And while that can be effective, that's not the only manifestation of racism. Sean learns that nothing he can personally do can change the way people are going to perceive him. The problem isn't with him personally, but with the world around him that treats him so unfairly. And as a young teenager who's being vilified, he can't really do anything about it. So all he can try to do is navigate around the world the best he can. Which is pretty heartbreaking, and it shows just how powerless these young men are in this larger context. Don't get me wrong, the story still trips up a bit. One of the larger antagonists is a Southern hick sounding guy, which, okay, but to imply that deliberate racism only comes across from those, damn Midwestern hicks is not only inaccurate, but a stereotype I think needs to end. Also, I don't know how I feel about the goal of their journey being, going to Puerto Lobos, Mexico. We know when they're born and raised in America, and there's not a whole lot of women in this story. That being said, I did enjoy the wealthy Berkeley people judging and looking down on the brothers because yes, their subtle jabs are also part of this racial allegory and need more attention. I'm willing to see past their destination because I can assume Sean is grasping at straws because he doesn't know what he's doing, and hopefully Lila will stay around as more than just Sean's friend, and their mother actually becomes a character. But after all, this is just chapter 1. There are still 4 more parts of this story. And it does end on a pretty good note and mission statement. When they meet their ally Brody, who I love because he's the perfect example of an ally, he's really empathetic and he specifically states, "Hey, I know I can't ever relate to how it feels to be judged by your skin, but I want to help." Which, yes, that is what an ally is. Understands and helps, but acknowledges their own distance from the issue. Anyway, when Sean has a moment with Brody, Sean makes a remark about Brody being so political, to which he responds, "Everything is political." Which I think sets a good tone for the rest of the narrative, because I think this sums up Sean's whole problem. Like it or not, these politics are going to be here, because politics are made by people, and Sean is at the mercy of that even if he doesn't want to be. And I think the game addressing that in a weird fourth wall break kind of way allows the creators to say, hey, these are our messages. Our politics are always there. You can call it forced and heavy-handed, but these things do happen and they should be taken seriously. And and a lot of that work still remains to be seen. That message can go astray or land, because it all truly depends on where and how this story articulates. But until part 2, that's all I got. Thanks for sticking around and sharing this with your friends, and I'll see you all next time.